Hello, U.S. History 2 students, and welcome to the course and your first lecture for the entire year. So that's very exciting. This is about your first unit is the Second Industrial Revolution, which is a period that takes place in the United States immediately after the American Civil War. Last thing you folks learned about was the period of Reconstruction, which is rebuilding the South. This is, in a sense, how America builds after the Civil War is over, just in general. So the kind of subtitle of it this is the "We Build a World Out of Steel, Oil, and Rubber." This is known as the heavy industry trifecta, and so you can just think of an automobile for an example of how industrialization uses these materials: steel car body, oil, to power it, and then rubber tires to make the thing move and to do all the flexible parts. All right, these are the standards and the questions you'll be able to answer by the end of the unit, especially in your summative assessment, which is outlined in another assignment. This assignment, or this video, is intended to help you answer this question right here. So, give three specific examples of how industrialization impacted America and why it matters. As in any history class, the why it matters is the more important question because that's the one that you have to argue and you have to make a point backed by some evidence and some reasoning. So, technology growth and the role of government, and we're going to explore those in the next couple slides. So, it shouldn't be left unsaid that one of the most significant impacts of industrialization is that of increased carbon emissions. This is a chart. Let me just put my little icon way up here. That shows the carbon emissions in millions of tons, and we can look and we can see, 1751, less than 2,000 tons of carbon thrown in the atmosphere by human activity largely, and then by the time period we're talking about here, around 1865 to 1914, you see the beginning of what becomes a really aggressive trend after the First World War that ends in 1918. This is a chart that is nearly 10 years old at this point, and so the numbers have only ticked up more. And as everyone knows, the impact of carbon in the atmosphere is global warming and climate change, which has effects from weather to destroy the oceans, etc. So again, we're talking about a lot of changes that benefited people, but there's also a really significant issue that we now have to deal with from this time period. All right, so first thing I want to talk about as far as the U.S. is concerned is how the Civil War impacted industrial growth. This is actually an example of a kind of gun that was built in the city of Springfield, Massachusetts. And if you look real close, it says Ames Manufacturing Company from Chicopee, Mass. And so during the Civil War, the Springfield Armory, which you spoke about with Mr. Lapine back in US 1 in regards to Shays' Rebellion, and we're going to talk about right now, was a pioneer in basically making industrialization happen in the United States. The gun stock there used to be carved by hand. It would take roughly 8 people to make a single weapon for the U.S. military. By the time that the Springfield Armory and mass production basically was invented in that location, you end up having one person, making the same gun that would take 8 people a week in a single day. So it's a very much a faster process. Most of the workers in the various factories were immigrants, and most of them were specifically recruited to work in various industries. For example, in Northampton, right on the border of Hatfield, immigrants from England were actually recruited because they were famous silk weavers. And Florence, the suburb of Northampton, had a big silk weaving industry. So you can repeat that pattern in pretty much every industrial city in the country. So one of the most important things that helps industrialization occur in the United States is there are plentiful resources for those 3 items that were mentioned at the beginning of the presentation: oil, rubber, and steel. The rubber, a little bit different, but the iron and oil, are in large numbers, especially in the mountains of the United States. This is a map of the Appalachian Mountain Range, and everything that is dark colored is a coal bed. So one thing you can notice is the city of Pittsburgh, right here underneath my little photograph, is right at the head of a bunch of rivers. And if you know anything about U.S. history or just travel in general, if you think about like Interstate 91, it's much easier to travel by road or by rail or by water on the edge of a river because the land's flat. So Pittsburgh here, right near a bunch of coal, also right near a bunch of iron buried underneath the earth. You combine coal and iron and you get steel. And so you get the Pittsburgh steel industry is born, which is absolutely vital for industrialization and making, say, those weapons up in Springfield. So let's see, lots of lumber, and before oil starts to be drilled out of the ground, it was actually New England's whaling industries, so Nantucket Island, etc., that would find oil that was used for lighting mostly. And so again, the waterways are really key. The easiest way to travel is the way that people are going to go. So getting back to the immigrant question, this is a photograph of a Bavarian immigrant. He's wearing his leather pants, his lederhosen. He's got his fancy felt-looking hat there, and he is an immigrant to America. So people like this fellow, there's various reasons immigrants come to the United States today, and back then they're very similar. We refer to them in the social sciences as push and pull factors. So a push factor is simply a reason you might want to leave a place. I have it listed as economic and political pressures, and to be less, cute about it, that's war, or say there's an economic depression, or you're a religious minority and you're being persecuted. So just, think about a reason, would it take you to move from your home? You're a teenager, so you probably say very little. This place is terrible. I'm trying to go. But it's hard for people to give up their roots. So push factor, what's pushing them out? And then where do they end up wanting to go? Well, it's pull factors. So factory jobs in the United States, huge draw of immigrants, again, many of whom were specifically recruited. If you have family already in an area, very likely to want to move to that place. People within the United States move to areas with family members. You met all of you, because this is a nation of immigrants, have stories about people traveling probably to be with family members where they ended up living. So this time period, this second industrial revolution, has almost 1 million people arrive in 20 years. And to give you some perspective, the United States population was roughly, during the Civil War, about 30 million people. So 1 million people is a really significant number for a country that before that, only had 30 million people about 20 years prior. One of the biggest push factors, the first thing that gets industrialized, is agriculture. So in Europe, you get large farms. All of a sudden, millions of people don't have jobs because a tractor is plowing a field instead of 100 workers. So you replace people with machines, they have to do something else. And what these people had to do was go move to the US, which had enough work that they could largely be employed. Although we'll see the cheap labor part is because these folks don't have a lot of protection or capital, which is a word that you're going to be learning as we go through this unit. So immigrants become a very large share of the U.S. population, as you can see by this chart. Immigrants as a percentage is the orange line as a U.S. population. And, during the Second Industrial Revolution, roughly 15% of the country is of immigrant background. And this is actually cut off. As of 2012, we're a little bit below that. We're relatively in a similar place. So historically, we're kind of in a pretty normal place as far as immigration is concerned, at least if we're looking at the Industrial Revolution. You can see there's a dip. We'll talk about that more once we get through World War II and kind of discuss some of the politics. All right, so the government plays a major role in establishing capitalism in the United States. So there are novelists like Horatio Alger. So he's a private individual, but he responds to a federal government that tries to make it so it's difficult for foreign industries to compete with American industries. So they basically tax imported goods. If you've ever wondered why there aren't Chinese made cars on the streets of the United States, is because we have a very high tax on importing those goods, which is called a protective tariff. The US government also was what was called laissez faire as far as the economy was concerned. And that was really about things like, can the federal government say how much people should get paid, like a minimum wage? Or should they be able to decide what safety conditions should be in a factory? The phrase laissez-faire means to leave alone in French. And the political philosophy of the federal government during most of the Industrial Revolution was to say, no, we're not going to interfere with the economy. We're going to be laissez-faire. Getting back to Horatio Alger, this private individual, he wrote rags to riches stories. So you've got this book, Strive and Succeed. If you start off and you work hard enough, you're going to succeed, and everyone just needs to. The reason people are successful is because they've worked hard. And so it's a story that's really feel good. It's like if you work hard enough, you can succeed. This kid here is a paperboy. He ends up getting rich because he gets noticed by somebody. Next book, there's another orphan and he gets rich because he works hard, et cetera, et cetera. People like the story, even though the reality didn't really work that way. So except for some very important cases like an Andrew Carnegie, who we're going to speak about later. So, invention and creativity drove industrialization. As difficult as it could be as a poor immigrant to kind of rise up the economic ladder, you have people doing incredible things with their brains and in this time period. So you have folks like Thomas Edison or Nikola Tesla who basically either work, in the case of Tesla, largely independently, but with teams of other scientists. Edison had a group called the Muckers, and they basically invented things as a team. So this is a group of these muckers, and they invented 60,000. I'm sorry, not 60,000, 6,000 to 4,000 or part of that 6,000 to 4,000 patents a year. So you're just getting new things invented every week, and sometimes it's a race to see. Two people have the same idea, they rush to the patent office. So it's a really remarkable time period as new things become possible, as new inventions give people new ideas. Getting back to the car example, you can't have, you invent an automobile, sure, and then maybe you can invent a tractor trailer truck or something like that because you have the basic thing designed. So people build off of other people's ideas. So one of the most important inventions in this time period, getting back to again that industrial trifecta of oil, rubber, and steel, is the Bessemer process. This is an image of a giant Bessemer cauldron. It's made of very, very thick metal, obviously, and in the top of it, molten iron and carbon are poured into it and then mixed. And oxygen's your secret ingredient that gives you this really high quality steel. The thing that's important to remember about steel versus, say, iron turns into steel with the addition of carbon. And the carbon makes the steel not stronger than iron, but it makes it more flexible. And so the thing that makes steel really valuable is it's a metal that's strong, yes, but it doesn't snap under pressure. You have a piece of cast iron, it can snap. It's really strong, but it's brittle. Steel is softer in a sense, which is a funny thing to think about steel, but it is able to sway. So skyscrapers, for example, sway. You can think of a suspension bridge, those thin strips of steel tied together allow it to bend with the environment rather than breaking, which is a good lesson for all of us, actually, especially in a year where things are a little bit unusual. So, again, bend, don't break, and you're going to stand like a suspension bridge. Speaking of, this is a picture of the Brooklyn Bridge being built. The foreground here is obviously the bridge. It's under construction from both sides of the Hudson River. You have these two dapper 19th century gentlemen, sitting up here and looking out at the world, and there's New York in the background. No skyscrapers yet, though, which is pretty amazing. They started with the bridges. So, if you ever look at I would recommend looking up a picture of the Brooklyn Bridge and looking at Manhattan behind it and just how different this place is. And this is in the 1880s or so. So it's not that long, 120, 140 years. And let's see. So, another important detail of industrialization is it changed the way that we measure time and space. Long story short, railroads make it so you can go everywhere and with anything very, very quickly and give it to anybody. So you want to take a train to Boston from North Adams, you can go through a tunnel blasted through a mountain, and you can follow this timetable and show up. You want to get goods that are made in Florence, getting back to that silk in California. Well, they can get shipped by train eventually, once the transcontinental railway is built, to that other side. You want to know when it's going to get there. Time zones are invented so everyone uses the same time. It used to be that noon was, which, in some ways makes more sense, was when the sun was the highest in the sky. This experience you have when you get to school where it's dark out, that wouldn't have been the case. Dawn in the start of the day would have been when it got light out. And so, we decouple the way that we measure time from the seasons and the environment with things like railroads moving so fast that your clock is no longer good once you get to a new spot. And it's, the world just starts to heat up. We talked about climate change at the beginning. Railroads also speed up how fast things go, at making space smaller. This is also, if you think about how you measure how far away something is, you don't often say miles. You probably say time. So it's 25 minutes from Hatfield to the Hadley Mall rather than how many miles, right? So you're thinking in the kind of way that industrialization made. Here's a GIF or a GIF. I don't remember. I'm sure you all have comments about that, of pretzels being made. So time and space again. How are they dealt with? People don't need space as much, which I'm looking forward to this first week, especially. We have time to discuss, and I want to discuss that idea with you. Um, Mass production is another really, really, really important thing. Labor matters less, the work of your hands, right? If a machine can fold pretzels faster than I ever can with more precision, why would a human being fold pretzels? And so maybe I could get a job mining this machine, but I'm certainly not going to be a pretzel maker at the big pretzel making factory if this machine exists. So, just getting into the impacts of industrialization again, people move to cities, immigrants move to the country. You get pollution, more people move from the countryside to the city. And this is the world we live in now. And the US is connected to the rest of the world. It's the world that we live in is a result of the second industrial revolution. And because of that, US history 2 is really the story of us. So, here are some pictures of cities, just to end the thing off. Very pretty. I think they're quite nice. I always enjoy traveling. If you've been to Paris, of course. This is Seoul, South Korea. Beautiful. This is Vancouver, British Columbia, or oh gosh, is Vancouver? Is it? No, it's definitely Vancouver. I thought it might have been Seattle. But again, west coast of the United States. I'm sorry, of Canada. This is Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. A little grainy, but these are two of the tallest towers in the world. This one, of course, is the greatest city in the world, New York City, which someday we'll all get to visit again.